Chinese motorcycle made by ZXMOTO did something almost no one thought was possible. It beat Ducati and Yamaha on world's biggest superbike stage. If you're a motorcycle fan, you probably know it's in many headlines. But how did it get there? Honestly, most Chinese people, including myself, had never even heard of this brand 6 months ago. In our minds, China's motorcycle industry was dead years ago. Well, that's the story we're going to explore today, and trust me, you'll be amazed by it. Now, let's go back to the beginning of this story. In 2006, in one of the poorest counties in China, a 19-year-old flagged down a TV crew and begged them to film his motorcycle stunts. This was Mayang, a county in Hunan so poor the government had officially labeled it a national poverty county. The crew said no. The reason was simple. His bike looked like junk, and honestly, he didn't look like anyone worth putting on camera. So they drove off. And here's the part that gets me. He didn't quit. He chased their car in the rain for over 3 hours, until the crew finally gave up and started filming, just to make him stop. And then he performed, and to everyone's surprise, he blew it. He tried the stunts a few times and fumbled everyone. By now, you probably have a rough picture of this young man. Impulsive, a little reckless, stubborn to the point of obsession, and completely in love with motorcycle. His name is Zhang Xue, and he's the man who built that winning bike. His background, even by Chinese standards, was about as rough as it gets. He was born in that poor inland county. His parents divorced when he was 3, and he was raised by his grandmother alongside a younger sister. He did not continue school after middle school. He had no money, no diploma, and no connections. But life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. 20 years later, his motorcycle beat Ducati and Yamaha in the WSBK World SSP class 6 times. And there's a real chance he takes the season title. His winning bike only sells for a third of Ducati's price. And here's the part that's almost hard to believe. Just 1 year before that win, his company was close to bankruptcy. So what's actually happened in those 20 years? How does a man with nothing end up beating Ducati? Did he get some kind of special help? And here's the part that will blow your minds. China had banned the motorcycle in most of its cities. It is definitely not a friendly place for a motorbike entrepreneur. Today, to get the real answer, we have to follow 2 stories at once. His and his country's. And it starts in 1985. In 1985, China began a campaign against motorcycles that would last 20 years. It started in Beijing, and by 2007, Guangzhou had banned them entirely. Of about 300 Chinese cities, more than 200 took part, and the restrictions kept escalating. First, the ride inside the city core. Then, tight limits on new plates. At its peak, a single motorcycle plate in Beijing sold for over 500,000 yuan on the resale market, around $70,000, a lot more than most cars. Then the government required every motorcycle to be scrapped after 12 years, which wiped out its resale value completely. Why do all this? The official reason was public interest. Motorcycles were not safe, they were too loud. But there's another explanation, probably closer to the truth. To clear the road for cars. Well, that's a big plan of this country. Either way, the industry Zhang dreamed of joining was the one his own country was suppressing. As a result of this campaign, half of China's motorcycle factories disappeared, but the ones determined to survive found a way out. China had banned riding motorcycles, but never banned building them. So the factories pivoted to exports, mostly as OEMs, building bikes for other people's brands. For 20 years, they survived by selling cheap motorcycles to Vietnam, Africa, and Latin America. And true to the old reputation of Chinese manufacturing, they undercut each other so hard that a bike selling for $800 crashed to $200, with some factories making about $4 a profit each. But that brutal race left China with one of the most complete and cheapest motorcycle supply chains on Earth. And that supply chain is what Zhang would build on. Now, back to Zhang Xue. At this point, he was still chasing the dream of being a rider. He pulled in every bit of savings to combat, trained at his own expense, and entered the National Motorcycle Stunt Championship. And he lost. He realized his body just wasn't built for a pro racer, and he could no longer afford to compete. In 2009, just 3 years after that 3-hour chase in the rain, he sat in front of the TV in tears and told his new wife, "I have to earn a living now." He let go of being a rider, but he decided instead to build one of the best bikes in the world. This was the first pivotal decision of his life. He started as a repair mechanic and spent 4 years at a company called Apollo. Over those 4 years, he went from fixing broken bikes to understanding how a whole company designs, sources, and builds motorcycles for export, and he earned the trust of Apollo's chairwoman, a woman named Ying, who became his mentor. In 2012, something shifted. A client wanted Apollo to build a road bike for the Brazilian market, so Ying took Zhang and the sourcing team to Chongqing to study the supply chain. But the numbers didn't work, and the project got cancelled. And yet, that trip showed Zhang something. He realized that Chongqing's complete motorcycle supply chain could make his dream of building a top-performance bike real. In his own words, in their parts market, he could source every component for a whole bike in a single day. Then he made a decision. He wanted to go to Chongqing and chase his dream himself. Ying said yes, and handed him the leftover parts from that study, about 30 kits, each one enough to assemble into a complete bike. He took those kits, about $3,000 of his own money and his wife, and moved to Chongqing. In that famous 8D city, his bike building dream began. To raise his first capital, he assembled bikes by hand from those kits, sold them through an online motorcycle forum, and did that for 4 years, slowly building up his first real money. So right here, two things collide. One man's decision to build the ultimate performance bike and the rise of an entire country's motorcycle supply chain. For the first time, Zhang had a real shot at this. But if you think it's get easy from here, it doesn't. In 2017, Zhang just turned 30. The market finally opened up for him. As China's middle class grew, a new market was taking shape. People started to buy motorcycles as a hobby, for weekend rides and road trips out in the countryside, where bikes were still allowed. He co-founded his own brand, Kove, with 2 partners. Their first real model, the 500X, ran on a boxing twin-cylinder engine, and it sold from 800 units to 3,000 to 30,000. So from this point, it would be reasonable to assume that Zhang then developed a better motorcycle and went on to surprise the world in 2026. But that is not what happened. What actually happened is that Zhang got pushed out with nothing. It's a story as wide as Steve Jobs getting fired from Apple or Elon Musk getting forced out of PayPal. Let's look at what happened. In his second year, Zhang became convinced that the West would eventually cut off his engine supply, and that the only solution was to genuinely develop his own. So why was he so sure? Because in fact, most engines called Chinese self-developed back then were not. For famous firms in Austria, Germany, England, and the US will design an engine for a fee, and other companies just license the design. Zhang refused, because a bought or reverse engineered engine is never the real cutting edge, and without that, he could never build a genuine leading motorcycle. This led to a serious disagreement with his partners. After lots of arguing, he borrowed about 30 million yuan, roughly $4 to $5 million from his own company, against himself, on the terms that if the engine succeeded, it belonged to the company, and if it failed, the debt was his. He bets everything again. And in that gamble, with a middle-class education and about a dozen workers he trained from scratch, he built a 4-cylinder engine he could assemble by feel, and pushed it to 16,000 revolutions per minute, a first in China. The engine went into the Kove 450R and 450R, 2 bikes that are now Kove's cash cows. There was just one problem. Zhang never got to enjoy any of it, because before those bikes ever took off, his own partners pushed him out the door. In 2023, there was a setback. Kove entered a class of World Superbike Championship for the first time, using a small 321cc bike that ran on a boxing twin-cylinder engine. Over the whole season, the team scored 22 points, and the champion scored more than 320. The results said it plainly. The team was far from competitive. But even that humiliation wasn't enough to push Kove into building his own engine. In 2024, the fights over money came to a head. Zhang wanted to put the company's cash into the next self-developed engine, a 3-cylinder this time. His partners wanted return, not more spending, and their position was reasonable. Building an engine is expensive and can bankrupt their company. Zhang got demoted from general manager to head of R&D on February 28, 2024. 37-year-old Zhang Xue chose to leave his own company, giving up his entire 36% stake and taking no money. But with that sacrifice, he traded his partner for one thing: he walked out with his core engine R&D team, and Zhang was forced to go all in again, on his own. This time, with his reputation in the industry, he secured the first investments of 20 million yuan from a venture capitalist who chose to believe in him. At his own savings, about 80 million, and Zhang scrapped together roughly $5 million. And with that, he had to build a brand new bike from zero to stay alive, and keep funding the new engine at the same time. But it wasn't nearly enough, and Zhang knew it. If his volume bike couldn't get to the market fast and start paying the bills, he was finished. At the tightest point, he borrowed about $1 million just to make payroll, and he gave himself one deadline. If he couldn't get the bike to market by March 2025, the money would run out, and it was all over. The company, the engine, the whole 20-year dream. So did he make it? Honestly, I keep coming back to this part, because with the clock almost out, with every last thing on the line, he didn't fold, he doubled down. On March 15, 2025, in Chengdu, Zhang launched his first bike, the ZX500RR, with a self-developed four-cylinder engine. In the first 12 hours of pre-orders, almost 4,000 people put their money down. Over 2025, they sold 21,000. The company survived, and their number of sales catch the eye of the state. In January 2026, a state-backed fund led around about $12 million, stabilizing the company about 2 months before its win. In March 2026, his bike A20 RRS lined up at the World Superbike round in Portugal, and his rider, Valentin the Beast, won. Not one race, both races that weekend. He beat Ducati, he beat Yamaha, and it ended a 37-year stretch where European, Japanese, and American bikes had owned the top step, then went on to win 7 more. So how do you beat a bike that cost 3 times as much as yours? You need a whole stack of tricks, and then Zhang pushed each one to the limit. He rebuilt almost everything around one idea: make it lighter, and make it rev higher than anyone thought possible. He used aerospace-grade materials most bike makers never touch: titanium, magnesium, carbon fiber in the engine and the frame. The payoff was an engine that spins to 16,000 RPM, and the bike so light it makes almost 1 horsepower for every kilo it weighs. And then there's the part that matters most. He built his own 3-cylinder engine and his own electronics. The exact piece Chinese bikes always had to buy from the West. If you're not a bike person, you don't need to follow all of that. The key point is this: none of it is possible if you buy your engine off the shelf instead of building it. And behind that self-development sits China's complete supply chain, one that could throw its full weight behind Zhang as he pushed into new territory. His bike was assembled in Chongqing, with the valve from Guangdong and 17 suppliers across Anhui, Shanghai, Shandong, and Henan. This is just the beginning for ZXMOTO. Plenty of problems still remain. The company still isn't profitable. Whether Chinese brand can hold the high end over the long run is still an open question. But here's the detail that stuck with me. Zhang still answers customer service messages himself, talking with buyers online every single week. So, do you still remember those 2 questions? How does a man with nothing beat Ducati? And did he get special help? The honest answer is no, and also kind of yes. No, the governments never handed him money when he was starving or borrowing to make payroll. But yes, in a deeper way, he was standing on something his whole country had built. And that's the real story here. And Zhang's story isn't really about one man. It reflects a bigger pattern in China, driven by 3 forces. The first is the manufacturing base. That dense, cheap, complete supply chain built up through years of bans and export wars, exactly what lets a tiny brand from a former mechanic grow this fast. The second is the fear of being cut off by the West, because Chinese firms worry about losing access to Western technology. They tend to either build their own or find a way around the blockade. The third is the move up, from building the cheapest commuter bikes on earth, the ones that earn a few $100s each, toward owning a bike that beats Ducati and keeps far more of the profits. So when you see the words made in China, you can start to understand how that phrase shifted from cheap and low quality to reliable and cutting edge. It's not only copying and not only government's money. It's a huge manufacturing system plus a real fear of being cut off, plus funders who refuse to quit. Together, pushing China from lower value work toward higher value work. Thank you very much for watching. Next time, I'll look at another under the radar company coming out of China hard tech world. Subscribe if you want to see it.